Anything is better than lies and deceit. Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shymanski. Or am I? I could be lying about my name. I'm also here with Red Szell. But is he really, though? Is Red Szell just an advanced AI chatbot? Well, yes, those are our real names and we aren't AI. You'll just have to take our word for it. And that's almost always what we do when we listen to books. Take the narrator's word at face value. We assume the narrator is telling the truth, but that's not always the case. Sometimes bold authors will have their narrators flat out lie to us. Red, we're talking unreliable narrators today. How's it going?
Very well, Jacob. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm delighted that you think I might be an advanced chatbot. I wouldn't
just a normal chatbot.
Normal chatbot. Yeah, no. Isn't it terrible when you know that you have been totally and utterly misled by a narrator in a book? You get that kind of, oh my goodness, why didn't I see that coming? And yet, in some ways, it's one of the most exciting things that I think an author can do to us when we're reading. I remember the first time it happened to me. I was reading The Turn of the Screw by Henry James at school. I must have been about 13, 14 years old. And our teacher had sort of given it to us because we're meant to be studying a portrait of a lady and we were all getting a bit bored. And he went, try this. And I went away, I read it, and it was before I went to sleep. And I just couldn't go to sleep after I'd finished it. Obviously,
Why not?
I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the questions going around my head, I turned my light off and then I turned it back on again and I flicked through the book and I went, could I have seen that coming? Could I have second guessed what was going on? Have I just totally misread this book? Where are the clues? And I was very used to reading sort of Agatha Christie detective novels where you can go back and you can see the clues, you can see where the sleight of hand happened. But to come away from a book and not know whether I'd read it correctly or not, and to know that the author was messing with my mind, with my perceptions, with the very nature of truth and sanity, as I sort of came to realize as I got a bit older, it made me feel both privileged to read a book by somebody that clever, but also a little bit stupid.
It's funny that a book with an unreliable narrator can make you feel stupid because as a reader, why would you want that? Right. But I think as a reader, what you want more than anything is for a book to make you feel something, be that joy or make you laugh or make you sad. If you're being lied to and you end up getting like this jolt when you realize that this author's been manipulating you, and I don't like being manipulated. I don't know about you, Red, but it makes you feel something. And to me, that is an author succeeding. That said, I think those feelings of frustration that come from unreliable narration not done well are very valid. And I have seen that type of thing. And when we say unreliable narrators, we're not talking about audiobook narrators, the one behind the microphone. We're talking about the in-book narration, be it first person or third person. The perspective from which the story is told. Essentially, like the character. And that character's narration of the story often embodies their biases.
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of put it into three categories. That there is unreliable narrator by dint of them being naive or too young, in the cases of some of the books that we'll probably come on to discuss, or of being manipulative, as in the case of Humbert in Nabokov's Lolita,
Oh, that's a great example.
Which, you come away feeling a bit grubby from that, despite the fact that it's a brilliantly written novel. He has manipulated you and the other characters in the book to get his own ends. And then there is the narrator who's just omitting something, which is the kind of magic sleight of hand, where suddenly the kind of the white rabbit gets pulled out of the hat at the very end of the book, and you just go, "Huh, okay, that was clever. I've been fooled." Or you just go, "I can't believe you just did that, and I've read the last 350 pages, and no, you've tricked me." And I think, broadly, that's how the three categories that they fall into. So yeah, I mean, I look back on books like Atonement, which obviously was made into a very famous film, where I've reread that a couple of times since, and even knowing the twist at the end, I think you would have to be a very close reader or just know that there was a twist coming to actually be able to second guess that white rabbit.
And this is the difficulty of this conversation, is that when we point out a book and say that there's a plot twist in it, it's kind of crappy for the next people that are going to go and read it to say, well, I know the plot twist is coming. Like, I'm looking out for it.
Absolutely. And, I was kind of going through my list of books, and I am amazed how many of these have been made into films. And
because they lend themselves well to being turned into films, right? Books with unreliable narration.
Absolutely. And I think we love that moment of, oh my goodness, you've done that.
Well, I think what happens is a television producer or a TV producer, when they read a manuscript of a book where there's like a big plot twist, they just picture that scene and they go, I want to make that movie, that TV show just for that scene, right? And I think it would be important to give a lot of examples of unreliable narration in popular books, just to make sure everybody understands where we're going with this before we elaborate on it. And you interviewed somebody on your show, My Life in Books, whose debut book does exactly this and have unreliable narration through the eyes of a child, which is an interesting perspective. How did that interview go?
A really, really good interview. It's a debut Irish author called Seán Farrell, who has written a book called Frogs for Watchdogs. Now,
Great title.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes from a poem about, elves, little people, who want to protect their community. It's a well-known Irish nursery rhyme and book, and Seán has kind of taken the kind of Ian Banks Wasp Factory type of view of the unreliable narrator. He's got an 8-year-old boy living in a remote part of rural Ireland in the late 1980s. He's being brought up by his single mum, who's a kind of healer, makes herbal remedies for people and for animals. Her Irish husband has run off. She is a member of the English aristocracy, and she really doesn't fit in. And this 8-year-old boy has been wrong-footed by basically being uprooted and moved around Ireland. And he doesn't quite understand what's going on, and he misinterprets the actions of a young Irish farmer who lives next door, who fancies his mother. And it gets quite dark, and you have all that unreliable narrator stuff but it's clever because as an adult, you can see and respect what the other adults in the book are doing and how they act, but seen through the eyes of a naive and slightly disturbed boy, you can also completely get his point of view. And you're sitting in the middle going, no, don't do that, don't think that. And it's a beautifully uncomfortable read. And it's what made me think again about unreliable narrators. I've read other books with child narrators where you think, oh no, that's just a little bit too naive. And so it doesn't
Yes.
quite click
Wow.
shut.
Mommy and daddy sure take really loud naps when they think I'm asleep.
Exactly, that's right. And you know, then you get unreliable narrators such as Rachel in Paula Hawkins's Girl on a Train, where you know it's fairly obvious from the outset that she's unreliable because she's hungover or drunk most of the time. And I think sometimes it's quite difficult to feel sympathy with that kind of character. But in this case, where it's a naive narrator, I certainly felt far more transported. It also made me think of The Life of Pi by Yann
Oh,
Martel. I don't know if you've
great
read that.
example.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I read that one in high school.
Yeah. And you know that still haunts my memory. And also, you know, when I started realizing that maybe I couldn't take everything that Pai Patel was saying as gospel, it kind of gives you that creepy skin feeling where you're rereading each sentence or rewinding on on your audio book player each sentence to go, is this correct or not? So yeah, no, absolutely. So that, as I say, interviewing Sean Farrell was an absolute joy, and he's got a lovely Irish accent, which reminds me of my Irish relatives. So
well, the thing with books that have unreliable narration is they often have a great rereadability.
Yeah.
Because you go in it with one perspective the first time, and then the second time, because you really know what's going on, it's like an entirely new book once you're given essentially the correct perspective now that
Yeah.
you really know what's going on. And in Life of Pi, it's a great example, because I will spoil The Life of Pi. This is an awesome book by a Canadian author, Yann Martel, about a boy in India who's on this ship that's transporting a bunch of zoo animals. And then there's an accident and he ends up in a lifeboat with a couple different zoo animals.
Tiger, I think, yeah.
A tiger, what was it, a gorilla,
Yeah.
a zebra, and a hyena or something like that. And there's this big fantastical story about how he survives out in the ocean with all these animals. Not all the animals survive. But then he makes it back to Montreal. And the twist is he wasn't actually in the boat with 4 animals. It was 4 people.
Yeah.
The gorilla was his mother. The zebra was janitor or something like that. And they ended up like killing each other. Yeah. And so this is a child's way of handling that trauma. And then the whole message is he prefers the story with the animals than the real one that happened.
Absolutely. And, you know, we were talking about the turn of the screw at the beginning, you know, is the unnamed nanny just trying to rationalize something that she finds too painful to talk about? And I think, yeah, is that great sort of dip into human psychology, what we will do to defend our brains.
And in Life of Pi, I know that a lot of people who were reviewing that hate that ending.
Oh, I love it.
Because they feel lied to.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a controversial book.
Yeah.
If you go and look at reviews online, you see lots of people saying, what a stupid ending. Like, you're telling me this was basically all a lie? What a waste of time. And that's the danger with unreliable narration, is that it's not fun to get lied to. And when a narrator lies to you, it's kind of like the author, by extension, is lying to you. And you're like, what? Screw you. Why are you lying to me, buddy?
Yeah, but you
A
know,
little
I
bit.
kind of think you're dipping into the author's reality. You're dipping into the author's mind when you pick up a book. And if they want to be a magician, if they want to lead you up the garden path, if they want to trick you, then you know that is their prerogative as an author. Now we might not always like it. I mean, I have to say American Psycho, which is again another
Mm.
unreliable narrator, is one of the few books I actually just couldn't finish. It's a shame because I actually genuinely like most of Bret Easton Ellis's other work. And I don't necessarily think that I'm a squeamish person. It, however, the unreliable narrator, who I think is called Patrick, if I remember, I, he's so vicious. I began to wonder if Bret Easton Ellis wasn't just getting off on imagining inflicting pain on people, and maybe he was sort of maybe that was an example of an unreliable author trying to fob off his wish fulfillment onto his character. I don't know.
When things get particularly over the top in the book, it starts to cross the fourth wall. And
Yeah,
then you start thinking like, what the hell is wrong with this author?
yeah, yeah.
Like if you read through like a particularly raunchy sex scene or something like that, and you just like think of the author like, ew, you thought of this?
Exactly, that's right.
I'm looking at you, George R. R. Martin. But listen, like as a reader, I like to think of it in this type of analogy for unreliable narration. My gut instinct is that revelations need to be given to me at a steady drip.
Yeah.
Don't give me all the answers right away, or else there's zero mystery. But
Mm.
also, don't withhold all the information, otherwise, I feel unsatisfied and frustrated. It has to be steady. The narrator of a book, I mean, the point of view narrator, is for all intents and purposes the entity that controls that drip.
No.
If the narrator is unreliable, they're giving you a drip that may or may not be poisoned. And
Yeah.
as you read, you start to suspect that the water starts to maybe taste a little funny.
Yeah.
And when you look at it that way, uh, sometimes it's nice when it's intentional, and sometimes it's frustrating when it's not done well. And this is an iffy thing because I have done it, seen it done poorly, and it just annoys me. I'm very critical of this of unreliable narration. I think sometimes it's overdone, and it seems to be quite a popular device to use as well.
Yeah, I mean, Gone Girl's another one that just doesn't do it for me. Yeah,
So what was it about that one that didn't do it for you?
I, I actually found the two narrators just a bit unbearable. I'm trying to remember their names. Was it Amy and I can't remember. Come back to me in a minute. But they uh, also I sensed pretty early on that I was being wrong-footed and led up the garden path. It
Mm.
just it actually, I just don't think it's a particularly well-written book, if I'm gonna be completely honest.
Yeah, let's just put it out there.
It's Nick and Amy Dunn, I think, are the two narrators, and
Mm.
I just especially Amy, sh you could just feel her twisting the truth. She just felt like a rather lazily manipulative female character, and I thought, well, this has been done before. I will, however,
Mm.
give you whilst I take with one hand, I give with the other. I will give you an example of, I think, one of the best unreliable narrator novels I've ever read, and it's called Gillespie and I by Jane Harris. Jane Harris is a Scottish author, and this book is set in 1888 in Glasgow, when there was a big explosion in the artistic scene. There was actually a big Glasgow art festival going on, I
Mm.
think, that year. And her unreliable narrator, a spinster called Harriet, is an English woman, a rather bitter young English woman who, because she's a spinster, doesn't really have any standing in Victorian society. And she comes up and offers her help and assistance, her financial help, especially, to a struggling artist called Gillespie. And at the outset, you think, gosh, what a lovely thing to do. And then this isn't a spoiler, as you read on through the book, you start realizing that she is not doing it out of pure altruism. And this is a book that is being written 40 years after the event, when women have been emancipated, and Harriet's looking back and justifying her actions of 40 years before, and contextualizing them. And I think it's very interesting as we talk about context now in literature. What used to go 40 years ago actually will now offend people. And it's a fascinating book looking back, but with an unreliable narrator that, I think stands next to books like Ian McEwan's Atonement as a really fine work of literature, but with a very clever, unreliable narrator.
Well, a book that you already mentioned, and I think a lot of people find very offensive by today's sensibilities, is Lolita. I've never read this one, but I know a lot about it because I've seen quite a few video essays on it and read up a lot about it. Can you dive a little deeper into that book and what it's hard to talk about it though, to be fair. What is it about that book that makes the unreliable narrator such a key aspect of what makes it notable?
I think Humbert being a middle-aged, sleazy man, utterly infatuated by a teenage girl. I think, it's funny. I think Nabokov writes beautifully. He has a very, very keen eye for describing beauty, and especially the beauty of young people.
Oh yeah, that's really uncomfortable.
But he is a middle-aged man, and his protagonist is a middle-aged man, and his protagonist is not writing about the aesthetic beauty of Lolita. He is writing a desirous piece about Lolita, and he is justifying it, and he is dripping honey into, Lolita's ear, Lolita, light of my life, love of my life, whatever. And it is very, very uncomfortable. I've heard people defend it as, well, Nabokov is being very honest, more honest than most of us would be about appreciation of young nubile beauty. I don't necessarily buy that. Equally, it has to be said, I don't think there is any evidence that Nabokov was a paedophile of any description. But it is a very, very uncomfortable read. I did get to the end of it, unlike American Psycho, but that could be because it's a shorter book as well. I will be completely honest. It's not one I'd pick up again.
See, and there's another example of a book that's so shocking that it breaks the fourth wall and makes you question the author. When people are questioning Nabokov's sexual proclivities and if they are or aren't illegal in any sense. But that book is basically the narrator, Humbert, gaslighting the reader and trying to convince you that what he's doing is okay. And what he's doing is romancing an underage girl. What an insane premise for a book. Unbelievable. Who came up with this? Nabokov has to be some sort of psycho.
Well, and it's just I bracket him with Picasso. Picasso was a pretty unpleasant guy and really did push the boundaries of taste in certain areas of his art, and yet because he was seen as a cutting edge artist, he was lauded for doing so. I don't. if it hadn't been Nabokov writing Lolita, I don't think an unknown author would have got that published. Yeah, I'd say it's an interesting one because I mean, you look at I guess the final book we should look at is Catcher in the Rye, which obviously was a first novel, and that's very raw. That's really again pushing at the boundaries, and it did get published, and yet Holden Caulfield is a pretty unpleasant character.
I never thought of that book as being an unreliable narrator. I suppose when a character is very naive, he is kind of unreliable in a sense, and that he sees everything as everyone's a phony, everything is stupid. Like, why do people do things the way they are? Everybody's faking. The whole premise of The Catcher in the Rye is essentially this kid that gets kicked out of school, and then he slums and bums around New York, describing everything as phony and how everyone's fake. And it's meant to evoke this feeling that a lot of teenagers have around the world. And in that sense, I like that book because it's very empathetic towards the mentality that a lot of teenagers had, especially around, the 50s and 60s and 70s. Nowadays, I think it's a little bit dated, but Holden Caulfield, so many people, especially when people read The Catcher in the Rye in high school, hate Holden Caulfield. He's so annoying.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I'd put him down as unreliable because he's twisted by his anger. He sees everything through the lens of his anger, his emotional insecurity, to do with his family setup, and so you have to take what he says with a pinch of salt. But yeah, I mean, one person's unreliable narrator is another person's sort of loathsome character or hero.
Yeah, it all depends on your perspective. And can I offer one more book of unreliable narration? It's a bit different than all the others because it's a work of nonfiction. Pimp by Iceberg Slim. And this is kind of like an unintentional, unreliable narrator. Iceberg Slim was a pimp in the 30s in Chicago. I think it was in Chicago. And he does horrible things. And this is essentially a memoir where he tells you all the nitty gritty little details of pimping. And this dude is a piece of garbage. And the book finishes with him saying that he's repentant and he realizes that what he did was bad and that he's now he's better. I don't believe him whatsoever. as I was continuing, as I reread the book, I'm like, this dude is completely unrepentant. He is romanticizing what he did, and he is lying to me when he says that he's repentant. It feels like the publisher just told him to add that last chapter so that it could be publishable. This dude is a human piece of garbage.
Well, there you go. I'm not going to go off and read that, but thank you for the non-recommendation, Jacob.
Yes. Red, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you so much. We'll do it again in 2 weeks.
Can't wait. Go well.
Of course, reliably here every 2 weeks. That was Red Szell, the host of My Life in Books on AMI Audio. That show airs Mondays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio. It's also available as a podcast. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. And we're also available as a podcast, and that includes YouTube. I'm Jacob Shymanski. Happy listening.